Hello, everyone. Good evening. We are today the 19th June 2025, and we are in our seventh webinar, ESCOM webinar, on our Eastern Shore Citizen Science Coastal Monitoring Network here in Nova Scotia, Canada. And today we have a very nice, all of the presentations are nice, but today is quite special because it's not just about a topic, it's about a place. So today we're gonna discover a particular perspective about one of our favorite beaches on the Eastern Shore, that is Torbay. But before that, to those that will be watching the video later, just to remember that ESCOM, we have this very simple website that is in the Linktree Healthy Coast project. From here, you can go to know everything about us. Will be just how to join our network, what is ESCOM, our different activities, including these webinars, the project that we have, all the media coverage that we had until today, some institutional information, and about the origin of our network, that was the Healthy Coast project. So just that you know that our network is a citizen science network, what means that we are here as a community member. It means that we are common people, that we are living just on the Eastern Shore, and we want to know a little more about our area. So this is the idea with this network, and the idea also with these webinars. I think it's taking a long time, to share the presentation, but the idea is that, okay, here it is. Great. So we as a ESCOM, as a citizen science network, we just want to learn a little more about what's happening on the coast, and start to have some conversations with the coast. The plan is that in the future, when we go to the coast, we're gonna have meaningful conversation with the beach, with the waves. We can understand currents. We can start recognizing and giving greetings to the different plants and animals that we have there. So this is the idea, to have this network. So I would like to invite you, to all of you, to discover a little more about our network. But just to start with our today's presentation, I would like to introduce our guest speaker for today. Is the Professor David Garbary from St. F. University. But I would like, David, if you could just present yourself and give us a little information about you and your story here in Nova Scotia.
Okay. Well, while I was, can everyone hear me? You're good? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm originally from Ireland, and my parents came to Canada when I was 3. So I grew up mostly in Nova Scotia, elementary school outside Halifax, and spent a few horrible years in Toronto, and then I came back to Nova Scotia and went to high school in Port Hood and in Wolfville, and went to university. I did 2 degrees at Acadia University, where I majored in biology and plant biology. And I discovered plant biology because I had no interest in doing medicine. And all of my friends wanted to be doctors, and the thought of taking animals apart and learning, bones and muscles and nerves, I had no interest. So I fell in love with plant biology. And I then went to England for doing a PhD. And when I was in England, my research involved a group of teeny tiny seaweeds. So I became what's called a taxonomist. I was interested in the names of these organisms and how similar they were and how they reproduced, and something about their ecology and evolution. And I became a world authority on this little group of red seaweeds that nobody cares about at all. Okay, that's not quite true. But anyway, so I then spent 6 years in Vancouver on doing research and a little bit of teaching before coming back to Nova Scotia and my position at St. FX. And I've been here since 1984. So I've had a long history in this part of the world. And my wife, who is actually sitting beside me, Dalna, is we've raised 4 children together here, and it's home. So my work over the last 40 years has been looking at, in large part, seaweeds and seaweed ecology, seaweed cell biology, applied seaweeds, aquaculture of seaweeds, development of seaweeds. And in recent years, I've become more intrigued with climate change. And I think this is something where I'm hoping you guys can actually reflect on some of the things I'm telling you, because what I've been seeing over the last 25 years are very dramatic changes in our local world. And I'm hoping that the notion of what I'm seeing at least bears some resemblance to what you're seeing. Does that make sense? So when I'm talking, if I start using terminology or words that you say, what the hell is he talking about? Please go like this and just say, please repeat, or please explain, or if you have a question about anything I'm saying. It doesn't matter how far I get through this presentation. I think what's really important is that you get something out of it. And I don't want to be speaking as if you were, 4th year students in biology or graduate students in biology. I'm trying to make this at a level that community members can understand it, and at the same time, use it to reflect on your knowledge. Because I think this is something that professional biologists often are totally ignorant of, and that is trying to come to grips with essentially the knowledge of people in the field who see it every day. And that's what I'm hoping that I can get something back from you. So you can all see the screen. I've given you this title, The Natural History of Torbay. Everybody can see that? Okay, so this is in some ways false pretenses. So yes, I'm going to talk about the natural history of Torbay, but I'm not going to talk about animals. And I'm afraid I know very little about animals. It's not quite true, but I'm not going to talk about animals. This is going to be about the plants. Okay, so let's go to the first slide, please. I'm waiting for Camilo to get me to the first slide. Okay, so when I first arrived in Antigonish 40 plus years ago, I was studying seaweeds, and the problem I was looking at was a seaweed issue, and I started going to Canso. So I would drive down from Antigonish up here and down, oh, you can't see my cursor. Anyway, out to Canso, and that was fine. And one of my former mentors said, don't go to Canso, go to Torbay. And so he took me there. This is one of my teachers, a man by the name of Jack McLaughlin. And he took me there, and I fell in love with the place. And just getting to Torbay is, to me, such a marvelous trip, sort of going down through Heatherton and then to Guysborough, and coming. Can we have the next slide? Next slide. Camillo's going to show me the next slide. So coming down the main highway from Heatherton down towards Guysborough, I think Camillo disappeared. No, I'm not sure. Is Camillo there? There we are. Okay. So when you come down that hill on Highway 16 and you go through Boylston and then you come through to Milford Haven, to me that's an amazing view. And that one of the things that made me fall in love with this place and this part of the world is just the scenery and the ocean and all these little villages and towns on the way. And if we go to the next slide, I think we'll get to the next slide. Yeah, there we are. Out to Torbay. And you can see on Torbay all of these little symbols. There's green circles and diamonds and red squares and a whole bunch of things. And this is some of the work that I've been doing at Torbay over the last probably 12 years. And I've been looking at seashore erosion on Torbay. And the primary sort of interest here is what has been the impact of climate change and sea level rise on some of these coastal communities. And all of those, each of the different symbols on that map shows a different year in which I've actually done a so-called profile or transect of this whole beach. And I presume every one of you have been to Torbay. Is there anyone who hasn't been to Torbay? Wow. You've got to go. I mean, the sand beaches are amazing and the shores are amazing. It's a provincial park, and one of my initial sort of stories about going there, I was out on the beach and I came back from my collecting, and it was probably over at the eastern end of this, and I had 2 big bags of seaweed. And when I got near the parking lot, I was approached by these 2 big burly policemen. And they wanted to know, what have you got in your bags? And it was either illicit drugs that somehow I was bringing into the country, or it was lobster. Anyway, they were a bit disappointed when I opened up the bags and showed them my seaweed. But I think that's an important story because it shows that the people in the community are looking after the place. And I think that's something really important. There's a stewardship that's happening here, that people recognize what you have is incredibly beautiful and has got to be protected. So that's my story about seaweed and lobster. So there's a number of beaches here. Anyway, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to talk about climate change. And I think all of us are old enough, except for Camillo, by the way, to be cognizant, to recognize that climate change has actually occurred in this part of the world. And this graph actually is a demonstration of that, in that it looks at sort of average annual temperature in Nova Scotia starting in the late 1950s and going up to 2022. And what this is saying is that between 1950 and approximately the year 2000, each one of those dots represents a separate year, and the temperature was pretty stable. Those were the old days. And I bet the old days were times when you could go skating on your local ponds. There was ice out there in the harbor. And certainly in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, there were many years when they had to delay the opening of the lobster season because there was often ice out there in the harbor and they couldn't get the boats out safely. And I bet there were many years when anyone along the eastern shore of the province could look out their window and see vast rafts of ice that were coming and scraping the shore. Hold up your hands if you actually recognize that. There used to be a lot of ice and there isn't anymore. And what's neat is that between 1997 and 1998, there was a jump in ocean temperature. And in the ocean temperature and in the air temperature. So that for the 50 years before 2000, we had a temperature that was roughly 6.5 degrees centigrade on average through the year. Some years were warmer, some years were colder. And then beginning in 1998, suddenly the temperature was 7.5 degrees. And that 1 degree, you might say, well, that's not very much. But that really had very dramatic impacts on our local environment. And so one of the things that I've studied as part of this is flowering. And in the old days, if you were out looking at wildflowers, what did you see? By the end of September, everything stopped. Why? Because you had the odd frost in September and early October, and the wildflowers were gone. There was nothing in flower. But after 1998, it seemed that almost every year you could go out in not only September, but also October and November and see plants and wild plants in flower. Now, how many of you have seen this? Does that ring a bell with you? At least Lorraine has, and Leon. Okay, so it's a real phenomenon. And so in 2001, myself and some colleagues actually did a study, and we were looking at plants and flower in Antigonish County. And what we found, we started this on November 1, 2001, and every 10 days, we went to the same 10 or 20 sites in Antigonish County, and we cataloged all the plants the wildflowers that we saw in bloom. And the last day of flowering was December the 15th. And we found 95 species in flower. That's pretty incredible. And I bet many of you who have gardens, yes, anyone have gardens? Vegetable gardens? Okay. And I bet in the old days, everybody used to grow tomatoes. Yes? And you grew those tomatoes, and what you had at the end of, or at the beginning of September, was a massive harvest of green tomatoes that you made into chow. Yes? And if you got a few ripe tomatoes out of that, you consider yourself lucky. That ringing a bell? But in the last 20 years, the falls have really been much, much warmer. And we can get ripe tomatoes in September and even into October. And in Antigonish, in some years, the first frost hasn't even occurred until November 1. So the climate has changed. And while that's air temperature, it's also ocean temperature. So the ocean is a lot warmer than it used to be. And I would presume that anyone that's tried to go swimming at Torbay I remember taking my kids there in the early 80s. And if you were a 10-year-old, you could go in the water. But it was cold. Even in August and September, it was cold. And now you can go to Torbay in August and September, and that water is actually swimmable. People can go in the water and actually appreciate it. And on some days, you can actually get water that's almost warm to the touch. And that's because our ocean is warming and we're getting all of these things coming off, gyres of water coming off the Gulf Stream that are depositing that warm water on our shores. So I'm just curious, have any of you seen evidence of climate warming in this part of the world? Anyone like to contribute something? Okay, Lorraine, what would you like to contribute?
In 1971, I was a biology student at Dell, and we were doing a survey, a 1 meter square, out by the ocean, just out on the south of Halifax. And yes, it was sort of mid-October. There was nothing left that was actively alive in that square meter.
Yeah.
Now you see roses in December.
Yeah, no, it's really amazing the change that's occurred in terms of our temperature. And it's really that change is primarily impacting us in the fall and early winter. We're just not getting the snow we used to get. Yes, I'm hoping you're nodding your heads, that your memories are, when you tell your grandkids that, back in the old days, you used to get meters of snow. They might laugh at you, but that was the truth. And now they cancel school if there's a couple of inches. Anyway, that's a different story. Okay. So another aspect of climate change that I've looked at in Nova Scotia.
Sorry, David. Natalie has her hand raised.
Okay, Natalie, what would you like to add?
So I was just going to add just the succession of hurricanes in the last 10 years. So, growing up, you never heard of hurricanes. Nor'easters, yes, but hurricanes, extremely, extremely rare. And within the last 10 years, we've had, 5 major hurricanes hit Nova Scotia? So.
Okay. Well, Natalie, that's a great introduction to my next slide.
Okay, perfect.
So I have looked at precipitation in Nova Scotia. And while people do complain of summer droughts, especially down in the southwestern part of the province, there really has not been much change in annual precipitation. Our springs are dreary regardless. There's nothing we can do about it. But one of the things that I have cataloged is change in wind and change in storms. And so I've looked at airports. So airports in Nova Scotia, there's 5 of them that essentially have this weather data. Yarmouth and Halifax and Shearwater and Greenwood and Sydney. So those are all weather stations that actually have really good wind data. And what we can see in here is, in this figure, is really neat, is that it was actually, the windiest period was actually in the 60s and 70s. Okay. And it declined from that period down to around the year 2000. And it was stable for roughly 10 years. And in the last 10 years, 15 years, as I think Lorraine just pointed out, we've had a real increase in storms and wind. And it's real. Okay? And one of the interesting things is, so we have on this figure, you can see a dot for 2022. You see that? So it says the annual maximum wind gust for Nova Scotia was 122. So that's from those 5 weather stations. Now it was, yeah, that's the mean of those 5 stations. But when you look at this, what was the big storm of the last 50 years? You see the dot around 1976. Yes? You see that dot? Way bigger than anything else that occurred in the province. And so there was a storm that was present throughout the province. Every one of those airports showed us that major peak. Now, what was it? What was that storm in 1976? No going to your Google.
Groundhog Day gale. Hurricane.
Tell them the date.
Okay, it was February 1?
Second.
No, what February 2nd. Okay, Leon's got it. February 2nd, 1976. And we know that day is called Groundhog Day. And this was the famous Groundhog Day gale that wiped out whole communities in southwestern Nova Scotia. Okay. Now, you must have felt it along the eastern shore, because it did occur throughout the province, but it clearly wasn't the disaster that it was in the southwestern part of the province. But it just shows you how our memories sometimes fail us. And we think, the recent history is, what's most dramatic. And while Hurricane Fiona is a blip on this map, okay, it's in terms of the average for the province, it wasn't that much more. Okay? Now, one of there's a social side of this. One of the things, Nova Scotia Power. Is anyone in love with Nova Scotia Power? Okay, thumbs down for Nova Scotia Power. Thank you, Tim. Okay, so they've been telling us that, the storms in recent years are so bad, and they're, we have to raise the rates because we have all of this repair work to do. And what pisses me off about that, excuse my language, all of that infrastructure that was built in Nova Scotia, it wasn't done in the year 2000. All of those electrical wire systems and lamps, they were all put in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, when the storms were actually more frequent, okay, than they are now. So the next time you look at your bill from Nova Scotia Power, you can hold it up and the next time they increase their rates. Yeah. So this is another figure showing those changes in wind. And this shows that wind changed. It wasn't just in January. It wasn't just in hurricane season. It was throughout the year. And you can see in the 1960s and 70s that the average of those monthly maxima for those 5 sites was really high. And it declined really rapidly. So, I mean, the difference between essentially 70 kilometers per hour and 90 kilometers per hour, that's a big difference. And any of you that, are fishermen, anyone fishing for a living, boats? I'm sure you all know fishermen for a living, but that when you're up around, anything over 75 kilometers per hour is a strong gale, and you wouldn't want to be anywhere near the water in a strong gale. Anyway, so there's no question in the recent history of storms is that they are increasing. And the question is, are they going to keep increasing or not? And I don't know. Okay? And here's a sort of another view of the of looking at storms, and how many days in the year had storms. And you can see back in the 60s and 70s, there were a lot of storms. This is sort of the average number of storms at those 5 sites. So a day with a 45, up to 45 days with gale force wind per year. Anyway, we tend to forget those days. And it did calm down around the year 2000. Okay, so enough. I think I've said enough about wind, but I think that it's important for people to realize that our memories aren't always the best. I mean, we can remember that there used to be ice on those ponds, but it's hard to remember that there were more storms. Okay. So now let's go to where we're now at Torbay, and I'm just going to show you a few slides of Torbay, just because, as I say, this is one of my favorite places in the whole world, and I've been going there for at least 35 years, and I try and go there at least half a dozen times a year, and I just find it incredible how you can go there and there's nobody on the beach, or there's 1 or 2 people on the beach. It's one of the best kept secrets in Nova Scotia. Okay, so here we are on the western end of the provincial park, and you can see all of my dots indicating the surveys that I did, and near the bottom of that screen is a rock formation where the waves are breaking, and I've collected a lot of seaweed here. So a lot of my seaweed research is involved this end of the park and a study of a couple of seaweeds. Now, if we go to the next slide, see if I can go to the next slide. Okay, and here we have the other side, and near the bottom of this is the little peninsula that has the gazebo, and from the gazebo up going north to the beach, there used to be a boardwalk, and that boardwalk got blown out, I don't know, sometime in the late 80s, because I remember going there and finding bits and pieces of that boardwalk actually across the road. I mean, it must have been an amazing storm. Did anyone remember that storm? Anyway, it must have really hit really hard here. And anyway, so I'm been looking at this beach from a scientific perspective for probably 30 years in terms of the seaweeds. And for the last 10, 12 years, I've been looking at seashore erosion. So the erosion of that actual beach and how the beach has changed. And I've been going there almost every year and retaking this same data where I walk along the margin of the vegetation with my GPS, and every 5 to 10 meters, I record the latitude and longitude. And when I get back home, I put those data points into Google Earth. And what this has allowed me to see is that over time, over that 10, 12-year period, that this particular beach has eroded away probably 4 or 5 meters. Okay, which in some ways is actually quite good, because many other beaches have lost a lot more than this. And another big change at this beach has been a blowout, where the whole section of the dune just gets washed away. And it's really dramatic to see this, because where there once was a 3-meter tall dune, you're essentially just looking at a continuation of the beach. And I am concerned that, that as that beach erodes away, as the vegetation gets beaten back by sea level rise, that eventually we're going to lose that system. So there's going to be a break from that beach into the pond that's just up to the north of it. So instead of being a freshwater pond, it's going to be a saltwater pond. Now, one of the things we do on that shore, in that dune system, is my wife and I go and collect cranberries. Anyone else collect cranberries out there? Did anyone collect cranberries? Lorraine does, yes. It's and Jude does as well. It's one of the outings we do every year in early October. We go to Torbay and we collect 5 to 10 pounds of cranberries, and that's our winter supply. Anyway, it's one of the marvelous things you can do in this part of the world, is actually make use of this natural vegetation that we have, and the wild plants out there that are so edible. So, Camila, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so I told you I was interested in seaweeds, and here we have 2 seaweeds that are, I would say, becoming really important in this part of the world. One because it's disappearing, and the other because it's becoming way more abundant. And so this laminaria, okay, it's one of the giant kelp, and in the fall it comes up, and I mean, you can see it. There's meters deep of wrack up on the shore. Yes, did anyone see that? And I think it's called the finger kelp is the common name. And that sort of big blade is divided up into finger-like things like that. But that kelp does not like warm temperatures. And when the water gets up above 15 degrees, this thing stops thriving. Anything above 17, 20 degrees, and it will actually begin killing it. And so one of the fascinating things at Torbay and along, I would say, quite a lot of the eastern shore of Nova Scotia is that these giant kelp are disappearing. Now, I don't know if anyone has noticed that, but when you're down on the shore where you used to see these big kelp, you should really look and see, are there still kelp there? And do they look healthy? And one of the things that has replaced these kelp at Torbay, and one of my other sites that I visit is at Drumhead. Everyone knows where Drumhead is? Okay. Is this other seaweed up here on the left called Fucus serratus. And it's called Fucus serratus because when you look at the margin of each branch, it looks like a serrated knife. People see that? Okay, so that seaweed is not a native plant in this part of the world. Okay? And it came to Canada Canadian one, to the Gulf of St. Lawrence in the 1800s. And there's a neat story of sort of the molecular evidence in terms of where it came from, in that there was one colonization around Pictou Harbor, and that came from the Western Isles of Scotland. And then there was another introduction of that seaweed from in Inverness, picked Inverness, Mabu area. And that came from the west coast of Ireland. So it's interesting that we got a double whammy of those two, of the fucus. And that fucus is now a dominant species in the subtidal zone of Nova Scotia, in the whole Gulf of St. Lawrence. It's surrounded Cape Breton Island, and it's essentially been marching its way down the eastern shore. And sort of I published a paper on it south of Halifax, west of Halifax. And there seems to be there was another introduction at Yarmouth, so it's spreading from there as well. And it's fascinating in that it seems to be taking over the habitat where the laminaria used to grow. And that's a real shame, because those kelp beds that we used to have are really important for the lobster. And the juvenile lobster actually hide out in amongst those kelp beds, and the fucus plants aren't as good for it. So there's an interesting aspect of how climate change has modified the environment so that species are disappearing and new ones are coming in. And so that fucus is clearly an invasive species on seashores and along the eastern shore of Nova Scotia. Okay, so here we have two seaweeds that anybody that's walked on the seashore on a rocky beach should recognize that one on the left. And it's called bladder wrack. And if you're on a rocky shore in Nova Scotia, certainly on most of them, this is the most abundant seaweed there. And one of the things you can see along the branches are the bladders. You can see that it's got these little bubbles. And as kids, the kids used to break them, and they pop. And they actually have an ecological function in that when the tide comes up, those bladders are filled with air, and they have the seaweed floating up in the water so that they can photosynthesize. And one of the interesting bits of ecology that I've studied over the years is this red seaweed over here on the right. And the only place that red seaweed occurs is growing on the rockweed, growing on the bladder wrack. It's host specific. It only grows there. And I spent years trying to figure out why. And so here's a story. When I went to England to start my PhD, I was thinking of doing an ecological research. And I told my supervisor, I want to study the ecology of that red seaweed growing on Ascophyllum. And he looked at me in the eye and he said, no, you're not doing that. Okay, so that's why I turned to these little red seaweeds, because it was something I knew something about. And I decided when I came back to Nova Scotia that I would study that relationship between those two species. And it turns out that my supervisor was right. So he said he didn't allow me to do that project because he said it would take more than 3 years to do it. And that I only had 3 years of funding for my PhD, and that was it. So I had to have a project that could be completed in 3 years. And so I got back to Nova Scotia and I said, right, I'll show you. And I started working on this. And the first publication was 6 years later. Anyway, so the moral of the story is sometimes your supervisors actually know what they're talking about. Anyway, but that seaweed, that rockweed, is really important in Nova Scotia. So can we go back, Camilo, to that previous slide? Okay. The ascophyllum is a major harvesting industry in the Bay of Fundy, down essentially around Yarmouth, up to Digby Neck, and it's harvested in New Brunswick as well. And a company called Acadian Sea Plants. Has anyone heard of Acadian Sea Plants? So they harvest hundreds of thousands of tons of this every year. And they make, from that, they make a product that is a plant growth stimulant that it has almost magical properties. You spray it on your strawberries and they're more resistant to frost. You put it on your cucumbers and they're more tolerant to viruses. And you put it on, you name it, the plant grows faster and better and is more resistant to diseases and so on. And so those of you that have gardens and live near the seashore, you should be collecting that bladderwrack and putting it in your compost piles, because when it rots down, it is absolutely superb fertilizer for your gardens. And the story in Ireland, other than the potato famine, is that they would haul this up onto their rocky bits of land, and they could grow their potatoes right in the seaweed and harvest a crop. Anyway, so that's my recommendation to you. Go down to the seashore with your onion bags and so on, and pick some up and put it in your compost pile. Has anyone done that, by the way? Anyone? Well, get your grandkids to do it. Okay. Okay, so this is another plant that I suspect all of you know, although you might not recognize it. Now, does anyone recognize this plant? Okay, Jude does. And what do you call it, Jude? Oh, we'll have to get Camilo.
Sorry, okay. We actually had a French name for that, and it's called Gwenwood Rush.
Wow.
And
I don't know the French name, but the Irish have called it dulse. Yes, and if you go to Sobeys or various places, you can buy bags of dried dulse.
Yes.
Okay, and this occurs. I mean, it occurs off Torbay and along the eastern shore, but the water is. I mean, we harvest it from the drift, from the rack, and we can harvest it and wash all the sand out, and it's a bit tough. It's not as good as the dulse from Digby Neck, but my wife eats a lot of this. I mean, we buy bags and bags of dulse, and I tell my students who've never tried it, you're not a maritimer if you don't like dulse. Anyway, they take one little bite and they turn their noses up at it. So that's and the scientific name is Palmaria palmata. So because it has these finger-like blades that come out. Now, I put this slide in because this is a slide, an organism or a group of species called sargassum. And I suspect many of you have a reference for that word sargassum. What does that mean to any of you? Apart from seaweeds.
Sargasso Sea.
the Sargasso Sea. So this is this warm area in the middle of the tropical Atlantic Ocean where no land occurs. And there's a group of floating seaweeds that grow there, and they're brown seaweeds called sargassum. And that sargassum, because of the currents, survives there, and it forms a really neat community. And it's actually really important to our First Nations and to some fisher. Yes, Jude.
Yes, isn't this also the area that many of our North American eels come from?
Okay, excellent. Okay, so what happens is the adult eels from here swim out to the Sargasso Sea, where they where they reproduce, and those juvenile, they're called elvers, come back to swim back to the mainland of Europe and the mainland of North America. And it's fascinating. And we don't really understand how they do it. I mean, these tiny little fish essentially are swimming thousands of kilometers. And we certainly have the current social issue of, those elvers are actually worth a lot of money, and they are harvested and they're actually shipped to China, I think, mostly China, where they're worth thousands of dollars per kilogram. And in China, they grow them up to adulthood in fish pens, and it's an important food item. But certainly we've seen controversy in this part of the world over, who should have the right to harvest those elvers, and and whether or not our First Nations should be getting involved in this, and the extent to which anybody should be harvesting these juveniles. I mean, we've got real problems with eels declining in abundance, and our First Nations are complaining that adult eels are becoming rarer and rarer. And so the conservation status of those eels, I think, is an important issue in this part of the world. And I don't know, has any one of you been involved in that fishery at all? Or know anyone that's been? Anyway, it's so Leon does. Do you have any comments, Leon? Because I know it's been highly controversial.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Just up the shore here in Port Dufferin, they have been, I take it, illegally harvesting them there off and on every spring.
Yeah, no. And just the poaching of these things is horrible. It's bad enough that we have a few people that have legal licenses harvesting these things by the millions, but they're so valuable that there is quite extensive poaching that really has to be controlled.
That's correct.
Okay, so, but the Sargasso Sea is interesting, and I think here's an element of citizen science where I think you as a group can become involved, because these sargassum species that grow out in the Atlantic Ocean are undergoing a major population explosion, and partly because of human-induced nutrients that are going into the ocean. And they're washing ashore in thousands of tons in the Caribbean. I mean, if you look up sargassum and the Caribbean, you can see amazing pictures of the shoreline just covered in this stuff. And, people do compost it, but there's so much of it, it's hard to know. It's clogging beaches, and hotels are going bankrupt because they can't keep their beaches clean. But what's neat about this seaweed from a natural history perspective is that it's growing in the waters that are part of the Gulf Stream. And the Gulf Stream is taking these seaweeds up along the coast of Florida and up along the eastern seaboard of the US. And occasionally we get specimens of this in Nova Scotia. And in the last 5 years, I've collected it twice, once down near Bridgewater and once at Torbay. And I'm waiting for a massive bloom of this thing to come ashore. And that would be a really fascinating change for this part of the world. The fact that, all of that floating seaweed can actually make it to Nova Scotia. And so that would really represent a major change in ocean currents. And while it's unlikely that it's almost impossible that this species or this group of species could survive here, it could make a mess of many of our beaches if it really comes ashore in great length. So the next time you're actually out on any of these beaches in Nova Scotia, look for sargassum and report it. Well, if you report it to Camillo or on iNaturalist or anywhere with a photo and a location, that would be really helpful to me, because I'm trying to collect the records of this, and I'd like to publish a paper on this in Nova Scotia. So there's a project for all of you.
Yeah, David, I have a question that now that you refer to the Caribbean, could be because there is a massive agriculture, like the bananas. Most of the bananas that we are eating here comes from from Costa Rica and Guatemala.
Yes.
It could be the reason why we have this sargassum in the Caribbean and soon here in Nova Scotia.
It's quite possible. I mean, but it'll be taken by the Gulf Stream, and so a lot of the nutrients that are driving this are coming out of the Amazon, and also the dust from the Sahara Desert is essentially fertilizing this central part of the Atlantic Ocean. But the islands in the Caribbean where it's blooming, it has a lot to do with human effluent that's fertilizing this thing, by the tons, and that's endangering coral reefs. And so it's fascinating that, how human behavior in the Caribbean, could be affecting our beaches right here. So that's fascinating. Okay, so I think I've said enough about seaweeds, and since I know Camilo is more interested in the sand dune systems and the salt marshes, and I'm not advocating that people our age go out on these rocky shores to try and collect seaweeds. My wife thinks I'm crazy enough for doing it on my own, but so these sand dune systems, they're changing. And some of it is climate change, and some of it is human ignorance. And so one of the species that's is found in St. George's Bay on the salt marshes is this plant called crown vetch. And we first noticed this probably about 15 years ago on one of the barrier beaches for Antigonish Harbor. And it's become one of the dominant species on those sand dunes. And it's spreading essentially around St. George's Bay. So it hasn't yet reached Cape Breton, and it hasn't yet reached the Northumberland Strait. But this is a plant that I think people should be on the lookout for on their on the sand dunes. And it's often used as for erosion control along highways. So some of it is, well, we planted it for that reason. It's not a native plant in this part of the world. And so when it gets into a system, it can displace other plants. And it is a member of the pea family. And pea family, most of them have this property of being able to fix nitrogen. That mean anything to people when I say fix nitrogen? So they can take nitrogen gas from the air and they can actually make protein out of it. And what that means is that these plants are well adapted for surviving on sand dune systems where there's very low nutrients. And so once they become established, they can outcompete the native vegetation. So that's a real hazard. So the next plant.
Yes, Lorraine has a question or a comment.
Oh, sorry, question.
Is
Yes.
that the same as the vetch that is on the beach, down in Lawrencetown or or along the pathways, or is it looks different? The leaves are the same, but the blossom looks a little different.
Well, there are other species of vetch. There's cow vetch, and then there's a yellow one and so on. But this is quite a big plant. It can be up to 1 meter tall. And
Because of the beach at Lawrencetown, it's been there as long as I can remember.
okay, so I'm going to have to go and look. So my sons lives near Lawrencetown Beach. So the next time I'm out there, I'll have a look, because it should be coming up now. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So the next one.
Yeah, excuse me, David, but here Christine was searching in iNaturalist. So Christine, could you please?
Yeah, so I've searched it on iNaturalist. Apparently there are some spotted in Musquodoboit Harbor, and it's reaching at, like, if I'm not wrong, Lawrencetown. There was already some spotted in iNaturalist. So it hasn't reached Eastern Shore, Canada, but it has reached Musquodoboit
Harbor. Musquodoboit Harbor. Yeah.
Yeah. So this would be another species that, if you can verify its presence on these sand dune systems, that would be really good. These would be really important records, because I'd really like to know where it's growing and where it's infecting. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and just before pass to the next slide, just also, as you say, David, our role also as a citizen scientist is also, this is why we want to start identifying and monitor the different species. So the day that we discover that is the first, this species that is invasive in our beaches, we need to take action, because we cannot wait until it will be an invasion and will be a lot more difficult to remove.
Yes, so I mean, I agree that it would be good to take action. But once it gets established, I don't know that there's anything you can do. Anyway, because each one of those flowers produces a little bean pod that has, half a dozen seeds in it. Oh,
yeah, we're gonna see our collective action.
Yeah, that would be a really interesting project, I think, for if one could identify a beach where there's only a little bit of it at one end of a beach. Can you actually remove it without destroying the rest of the plants on the beach? Yep. Okay. So that's a problematic species. So the next slide. This is one that, and I think it was one of Camilla's students that wrote to me a year ago and said, oh, have you seen this Angelica on the sand dunes? And I said, no, I've never seen that before. And the next time I went to Torbay, I actually saw this on the beach. and there's actually quite a lot of it at the on the western beach, and this is quite dangerous. And after seeing it on the sand dune system, we drove through back up toward Goldborough and Drumhead. And at Drumhead, there's a little store, a little sort of corner store. And when you're in the parking lot and you look around, and there's thousands and thousands of these plants. And each one of them is producing hundreds and hundreds of seeds. And they're little seeds that can be blown by the wind and transported by birds. And this plant is going to be a real problem. And I think to identify the beaches where it occurs, and I think somebody, and it's not me, I think we should be looking into potential control measures for this plant, because I think it's going to be a real hazard along the eastern shore of Nova Scotia.
Just to mention, David, that in Black Duck Cove in Little Dover,
yep,
it's full of this species. I will, because now there is not the flowers yet, but I think in 1 month I will share with all of the network pictures of the beach. It's like a crop, you know. It's looks like we are harvesting this species because it's really invasive, as you put there. But I have a question. This is a white angelica, because there are many angelicas.
Yeah, and so this species is related to another plant that we have. I mean, there's quite a few species in this family. It's called the carrot family, and the common species we have is Queen Anne's lace. Everyone know Queen Anne's lace? And the common name of that is, well, Queen Anne's lace, but another common name is wild carrot. So it's actually the same species as cultivated carrot. And many of these members of that carrot family, some of them are toxic. You might have heard of giant hogweed. Is in this family, and just touching the leaves on it can make your skin break out in blisters. Now, this plant doesn't do that, but it's dangerous in other ways. Now, so angelica is a real problem. Oh, leave that on. There was a slide I should have shown, and that's of an invasive species that I've been studying. Called Rosa rugosa, the rugose rose. And this is an incredibly beautiful shrub. And it's one of, I mean, we have 4 or 5 rose species in Nova Scotia. Some of them are native. There's a thing called Rosa virginiana, which actually grows on sand dune systems and around at the upper end of salt marshes. It's a really common species, fits in beautifully with the environment, forms little red hips, the size of your little finger. But Rosa rugosa is a plant that came to Nova Scotia via Europe, and it's native to the Siberia and Japan and the Western Pacific. And the plant grows up to 2 meters tall. It forms, the fruits of it are the size of little plums. My wife can eat them almost like apples. And other people make jam out of them or wine out of them. But that plant is incredibly invasive in this part of the world on seashores. And if you drive from, I'm trying to think, from Goldborough and Drumhead toward Torbay, you pass by New Harbour. Is that ring a bell for people New Harbor, and the road crosses sort of the barrier beach, and on both sides of the highway there is almost a continuous run of Rosa rugosa. And most of the flowers are pink, and and it also has white flowers. But it chokes out absolutely everything. I mean, there's almost nothing that grows underneath it. Yeah. And it is another one of our invasive species that I'm looking at on sand dunes in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And there are some shores where it occupies over 50% of the surface of the dune. I mean, it's quite amazing. And it's interesting, along the Atlantic shore, I haven't seen it on the dunes yet. But again, if people start seeing Rosa rugosa on the dunes, that would be a really interesting bit of citizen science. And I think you should look out for it. Yeah. And it's fortunate that it's such a beautiful plant. And yet can, take over these systems. And I think it was in 2010, I went to Briar Island down in the Outer Bay of Fundy. And at that time we said, oh, there's an awful lot of Rosa rugosa along the shorelines. And my wife and myself and 2 colleagues, we spent a week in which we counted and measured and mapped every single colony of that rose around the island. And at that time, they occupied 10% of the shore perimeter, which was, and the perimeter is roughly 20 kilometers. And went back 5 years later in 2015, and there were 600 colonies. So it had actually doubled the number of colonies, and it was up to 15% of the shoreline of Briar Island. And this summer, we're going to go back and actually do that survey again to see whether or not that plant has become naturalized or whether it's continuing to take over the seashore. I mean, there are some colonies that are upwards of 100 meters in size of nothing but rose. Mind-boggling. So, I've spoken for, have I spoken for over an hour? Yes, I've spoken for over an hour. And I'm going to end with this story, with this picture, Vaccinium, the cranberry. And it's one of the delights of the seashores along the Atlantic coast of Nova Scotia, and being able to find these patches and go out and harvest them in the fall. And so I won't tell you exactly where our favorite patch is, but it is at Torbay. Anyway, so I think I've spoken long enough, and I hope I haven't bored you to tears with my plant stories. And I'm open to any questions that you might have. Okay, Robert.
Yes, and I should have asked it a long time ago, but when you were talking about the storms,
Yes.
and there are fewer now than there were, but do you notice a difference in winter versus summer storms?
No.
No, okay.
No. So it's, if you look at when the storms occur, okay, back in the 60s and 70s, they were in most months of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So 8 to 10 months of the year in Nova Scotia had a gale force wind. And around the year 2000, well, there always were fewer storms in the summer. I mean, July, August, September, I mean, we know there's fewer storms, but from 2000 to around 2010, there was almost none in the province. They dropped down to almost zero. And after that, they have been increasing both in number of storms per year and months of the year in which they occur. And so we're back up to, I think, 6 or 7 months of the year in which they occur. So, but most of our storms are fall and winter.
Okay. Part of my ask is I'm a transplant. I'm recent to Nova Scotia, but I've grown up most of my life on the Mississippi Gulf Coast.
Yes.
And I've gone through Hurricane Frederick, Hurricane Elena, Hurricane George, Hurricane Katrina.
Yep. So they're mostly summer. I mean,
Yes.
the hurricane season is actually June to November type thing. I mean, it might stretch a little longer than
They
that.
keep pushing it farther and farther, but
Yeah,
I mean, this past year was the first time I can tell you of a winter storm down there, because I went back to visit and got snowed in.
Wow. Yeah. So our storms here
Primarily
are winter storms. I mean,
Okay.
and our nor'easters are mostly in the winter.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Someone else.
Yeah, no, I have a question, but more than for you, David, I would like to know about Jude, because you have been living there for, in the Torbay area. If you experiment the same perception that David about the changes in Torbay, I think I agree with you, David, that this is an amazing beach. It really, there are 3 beaches there. It's one system, but there are 3 beaches there in Torbay. However, I'm not sure if this, you say that it's not much erosion, and I agree. I think it's because we have the dune and we have sea level rise, so this is why it's causing maybe some of the erosion, but less than in another part of the province and in the world, because we have the dunes there. However, I'm quite curious. I don't know if the juice is still there, but also to you, David, I'm curious with in this part, which is the interpretation center, that you can see to the right is the West Beach, and to the left there are the 2 East beaches. This, is increasing the changes during the last years, or do you think that is, it's quite stable, this change?
Well, certainly when you look at the beach itself, one part of the beach to the east, it used to be entirely sand, and then I went there one spring and there was a huge gravel field, and that gravel field, I mean, it came in a storm, and certainly that gravel, as it's pushed up against the dune, really does eat it away, and you can actually see the face of that dune, where you can see all the exposed roots of the plants, which is, it means that, that beach is eroding when you see all those roots. And it's along that part of the dune system where there's probably a 50-meter stretch where the whole dune from top to bottom essentially disappeared. I was shocked when I went out there, and as I say, that makes me apprehensive that somehow, I'll get to Jude. I'll get to you in a sec. That the dune has been weakened, and its resilience is down, and so that if we do get another storm, that's focused right there, that it will have really dramatic impact. Okay, Jude, your turn.
Just a point. I've been down to that beach a lot. I only live about 2 kilometers away, so I visited that beach a lot in my day and still do. But there are times when we go down, what you refer to as the Western Beach, you can go there in the winter time and see a whole section of the beach completely gone. No sand, just rock. And you say to yourself, this is it, the beach is gone. And then you go back in the spring and summer, and the rocks have disappeared and the sand is back.
Yep.
So I don't know, I can't explain that.
Well,
Maybe you can.
you're not making it up, first of all. And it does say that there's a lot of wind and wave action, and that there is a lot of sand that's available to keep these sand dune systems viable. Yeah, so we should be grateful for that. But
Yeah.
you're right, there is a boulder field along that western portion of the beach that wasn't there 10, 15 years ago.
And I would like to add what you say, that first, that this is why it's important to measure the beach profile every month, and also in winter. I know that in winter it's pleasant that go in summer, that maybe we need to go there, in -5. I was in Little Dover in March, but it's so important because in winter we have higher waves. So we have more energy, and this is why the sun go underwater. And during spring and during summer, we have more gently waves that they will move again the sun to the beach. So this is why it's important, the beach profile every month. But also, and this is something I wanted to share with all of you, and I will send you some pictures later, is 2 days ago, we were with Professor Patricia. We were there in Torbay, and we discovered very nice meadows in the west beach. Some meadows of Kenya, is the name? Kakile, that is I think the common name of kakile. The sea rocket is the common name. The Kakile dentule. That we saw very nice meadows there, but we need to protect these meadows, because once the sand is on the beach, and the plants start trapping this sand. So this is so important that we keep this plant there. But what is interesting that in the east side, we discover another meadows with different species. One is the Hakoni, the Sansiwar. Seasonwar is the name. Seasonwar was big meadows of this species, and also of the beach pea. That we know. So this is just to show how everything is connected, the sand with the waves, with the plants, and why it's important to record data, all of them together. And I think Torbay is an amazing place to learn about that.
Yeah, no, these are amazingly, they're living systems, and they change with the season, and they change with the weather, and it is important to go back and just to enjoy it, if nothing else.
Yeah. I think, Tim, you raised your hand before, I think.
Yes, I was just going to agree with you, just what you said, that it's common along the Atlantic coast of Nova Scotia that there's a cyclicity. In the winter, the storms and the high waves wash all the sand away, and then the gentler wave action in the summer brings the sand back. It happens every year. It's just a cycle.
Great. I don't know, any other comment, any other knowledge that you want to share with us? I'm new here, so I would like to know from your experience that you have been living here in the Eastern Shore for a lot more years than me. And that also, I think that Robert and Natalie and some of us, so if you have something that you want to share with us about your knowledge about how it's moving or about Torbay, will be great, just before finish the webinar.
Well, Natalie's grew up here, so.
Yeah. Oh, okay, Natalie will grow here. Okay, great. Lorraine.
Yeah, I don't know the beaches down farther, but I know Lawrencetown and Conrad pretty well, and they have changed amazingly over the years. But also looking at the headlands, because in my ex-husband's family, Story's Head, which is Lower East Chesapeake on the ocean, the island is pretty much gone. And I guess it's about 120 years ago, 125 years ago, there was enough of an island that's where they graze the cattle. So, I mean, the beach is still there, but the headland, the island is gone.
Yeah.
So, and also looking at the headlands at Lawrencetown, McDonald House, the church that was there, those headlands have eroded by about at least 100 meters.
Wow.
And the same in Cow Bay, the little church in Cow Bay. The road used to be on the seaside. Now it is on the land side, because the church will be gone in another 50 years probably, or maybe not even that. There's so much erosion on the headlands. And of course, that affects the beaches down below as well. So, and the other thing that I've been noticed is, because I grew up on Cole Harbor, the green crabs have absolutely destroyed all of the eelgrass that was there. And that was a breeding ground for lots of fish. Because the system is open, it goes out into the Atlantic Ocean and there's a channel between the Lawrencetown and the Eastern Passage, Cow Bay area. So all of that has changed. And you were talking about the eels and so on. Well, that was a breeding ground for flatfish, for all kinds of for eels, for everything. And we had to clear spaces to swim because there was so much eelgrass. Now there's none. It's totally clear. Which, clear water to me is dead.
Yeah, I think something interesting that I would like to give us a reflection is, because today we were speaking about Torbay mainly, but there are places like Cow Harbor, that urban areas versus rural areas and the changes, and where we can see more changes. So I think it will give you some information. And I just want to say that here we have the Sea Breeze campground that you can see there. I think this is Bob there. This is in Fox Island. We were there on Monday with Patricia in a kayak, because the Fox Island is totally, is nobody living there, totally natural. But we discovered that I think the highest biodiversity in plants that we found until today was there, not in the island, but also in the other side, in the beach, in the campground. So it's just a final message that try to continue obtaining information about the different areas and how this relation, because sometimes we say this climate change, but sometimes it's our changes. It's not just the climate, it's that we are changing too much the areas and maybe building too much. So this could be also part of the explanation, but we're gonna know better in a couple of years when we have more data about what's happening here on the Eastern Shore.
So just to comment on sea level rise. So the average rate of sea level rise in Eastern Canada has been, or globally has been, roughly 3 millimeters per year. And in 2024, the global rate was 5.9 millimeters. So it was a huge increase. And so that's going to affect erosion everywhere. And certainly on the Gulf side of Nova Scotia, we also have submergence. So the land is actually sinking. And so in this part of the world, we have a double whammy. The sea's coming up and the land is going down. And I'm seeing all kinds of changes. And I don't think it's quite so bad on the Atlantic coast because it's hard rock. I mean, a lot of granite, whereas here it's mostly sandstone and gravel. But sea level rise is horrible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Okay.
Jude.
It's coming.
Just a closing comment from me. For David, who knows Torbay quite well, I remember the day when there was a ball field there. We used to play ball, and it was probably the nicest, best ball field in the eastern part of the province. And because it was beautiful sand, you could slide into any base and you wouldn't get hurt, and so on. You wouldn't have enough place there now to hit a ground ball, let alone play a full game. And the other point is that the beach itself at one point connected the two parts of Torbay.
Yes.
And they used the beach as a road that connected the two sides.
Wow.
until they built the
New
cause.
road. Oh, no. Okay. Now that's fascinating because that clearly predates my experience there. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, just thought I'd let you
Yeah,
know.
no, and I think that's a positive thing that was done because, I mean, building a road across a sand dune is not a positive thing.
No.
And we see that at Big Island where they have to. Anyway, it's not a good thing.
Yeah. So that was back in the 50s.
Yeah, okay. So hopefully we can take some action in the future from our side, maybe not to recover. We cannot recover so fast as we destroyed, but at least we can try to destroy slower, so this is the idea with the message. So I just want to thanks all of you. Thanks, David, for your time to be with us today. And for all of you, I'm really, happy that see all of you here, that we have this opportunity to continue speaking about our coast and the Eastern Shore. So thank you, and see you next month.
T-shirt, by the way. I wore the special for tonight.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I would like to take a picture, with all of us and with your T-shirt, please. Yeah, but the legalize the seaweed, so it could be the official one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could be Christina. You could come here. Just give me a second, please.
Out of this.
Give me a second. We'll be here also. Do 1, 2, 3. Here is Christine. Okay, give me a second. Please smile. Okay, I think here we are. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So our next webinar, just to give the information and before I stop recording, will be July 17, about how to measure waves and how to build sensors to measure waves. And will be a guest speaker from Quebec, that he is a postdoctoral researcher in the University of Quebec, Rimouski, Jeremy. So just stay tuned to our next webinar. So thank you again for staying here, and have a great evening.
Merci bien.
Okay. Cheers, everyone.
All right.
Tell Tim to come over for dinner.
Okay.